Troy, you recently had a post on social media where you said, "I didn't like myself very much when I was young. I was kind of afraid of life and didn't feel like I belonged in the room half of the time." Mm-hmm. Why were you afraid of life?
I had not quite adapted to people in general yet. I was listening to audio cassettes of the Jack Benny programs, and I knew who all the dead Hollywood stars were. And you can't talk about that with other kids who are 10. It doesn't work. There is no other you out there that you have common ground with. So I just was kind of settling into who I was and what I wanted. And it's like, well, like every kid, I want to be famous. Doing what? I have no idea. But it's not anything the other kids are concerned with. So there's just nowhere to go with that. And that continued pretty much into high school. I mean, even when I was doing plays and things like that, it just wasn't, I hadn't settled in yet. And it really wasn't my crowd. I was kind of this interloper who was just getting into these things that these people had been passionate about for a long time. So it was just unusual.
And in what state was this?
This was it started in Ohio and then eventually Florida. I didn't kind of really figure myself out until I went to college and realized I didn't want to be a cartoonist illustrator, which is what I thought I had wanted to be for probably 10 years. I had talked to every major figure in the comic books industry that you could get access to. And I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. I can draw, so maybe I'll do this. And I don't think I've picked up a pen to do anything serious in probably almost 10 years.
This was at Full Sail?
Full Sail is where I actually put my last comic book out. That was where I said goodbye to that and decided that, film and TV was it for me.
So what changed? You said you didn't feel comfortable in a room. You were around theater kids or whatever that maybe had been, in the theater for years.
Skinny, good-looking guys with big heads of hair. And I was like, this is not, this is never going to work. I was too worried about types I could play and types I couldn't play. And, the good-looking guy is always the lead. And I was just like, what do I do? So I figured I'd jump Snake River Canyon and get into writing and just get out of trying to act or do comedy.
And did that change things for you? Did you feel comfortable then?
I guess I did. I mean, it wasn't really until I moved to Los Angeles that I started meeting people that I understood. And you could hang out, like most of my friends, sort of the big joke was most of my friends were guys that were 60, 70, 80 years old who had been very active in film and television since, as early as the 50s. One of my first real friends in Los Angeles, I joined a thing called the Caucus for Producers, Writers, and Directors. And the head of the caucus was a guy named Chuck Freeze, who is referred to as the godfather of the television movie. And he made something like 300 hours worth of TV movies. But he had started in the business in 1952, working for a company called Ziv that did the Cisco Kid and the Highwaymen. And I just kind of got into a groove with Chuck, and he would encourage me and he would say, "Don't freak out." He says, "I didn't start my own company until I was 42. And I'm like, well, I'm 30 now. I got to have a career first before I can start a company. So I am worried that what I can do in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, because I'm always thinking in blocks of time.
What happens when you feel yourself reverting back to your younger self?
Oh, I hate it. I love who I am now. And I can say that very seriously. There are just people who have been put in my path that have brought me out. Allie Willis, who passed away in 2019, was a songwriter who wrote, or should I say co-wrote, September, Boogie Wonderland, the theme song to Friends, lots of other stuff. And she was this amazingly expressive person that her whole philosophy was about everything is a canvas for expressing yourself. And when you'd go out with her, she just had these crazy wild patterns and custom clothes and just had this enormous personality and put up with no BS from anybody. And that somehow soaked through to me. I had tried to create a reality TV show around her that everywhere I took it, somebody would say, "Well, who wants to watch a show about a 63-year-old female lead?" And I would just start fuming. I'd be like, Ozzy was in his late 50s when he did the Osbournes, and I thought he was pretty interesting. It's like, why are we going to draw the line with a 63-year-old woman? We pitched it one time after we had spent thousands of dollars chasing her up to Detroit with a camera person and shooting all this background stuff with her. And I got one meeting, and it didn't go badly. There just wasn't any follow-up. It's like a lot of things in Hollywood where you You bare your soul about this thing that means so much to you to an executive, and then there's nothing. There's not a no thanks. There's just like this weird sort of whistling of nada. And that's what we got. Still the most fascinating person that ever lived, as far as I care.
Why did she bring Troy out of Troy?
Because I didn't really know that that's who I was. I have a streak of outrageousness that's more of an invitation to other people to interact with me. People that I know, especially Ken Lee, who works with my publisher at MWP, are in love with the fact that I have these crazy patchwork jackets that a woman named Rachel Culp makes for me. She's Robert Culp's daughter, who was a fairly well-known actor in the 60s to the 80s. But it's just that thing that I like feeling like internally, I want to be a mobile party. I want you to have fun working with me. I don't want you to stress out. The places where I've worked, we would do things like in the middle of the day, we'll just shut it all down and just like a row of ducks, I'll take people to the dollar store. So it's like, go buy $5 worth of something that you think you would like. And just, creativity is about being able to reset once in a while as much as it is hammering at something. And we understand less and less about that as time goes on because reality television, so much of it is non-union. So there are no limits to what you can do to the people who are making your shows. You can work them 18 hours a day. You can make them work until 6 o'clock the next morning. And there's no meal penalty. There's no anything else. It's just completely dependent on the humanity of whoever's producing the show. And Allie was always a collaborator. So she cared about the people she worked with. On Facebook somewhere, Stephen Bray, who had been in a band called The Breakfast Club many years ago and collaborated with Allie to write The Color Purple for Broadway. Stephen Bray wrote this beautiful eulogy for her when she passed, and he said it was like being with somebody who was connected to a what-if machine by Bluetooth. Like she always had some idea of how to shake you out of stagnancy and to inspire you to get past whatever was blocking you. So she would throw these enormous parties. Sorry, this is going to be a whole interview about Allie Willis. But she's just the most amazing person. And I'm going to try very hard not to melt down in front of you. Like the way she inspired so many people, her work process, God, she loved process. And learning to love process is what saved me. It's less about you have to do all this. It's just sort of like, well, if I do it this way, we'll be able to do this. We'll save money. We'll put things out on time, which is very appealing to employers in the end. But it's also a matter of like understanding how to get the most out of people without just saying, don't go home. You're going to eat dinner tonight in the office at 11 o'clock on your own dime because we're not going to bring in food for you. And I mean, and that's just what this industry largely has turned into because everybody's trying to figure out how to shave $3 billion off of an operation or something like that.
What's your message to others who may be afraid of life?
I would tell you to do, I won't say do everything I did, but the one thing that helped me was I was painfully shy. I didn't think I was as good as most people who were working. So I developed this sort of cartoon persona, which really went spiraling into the stratosphere after I met Allie, but was based loosely on, I was always a big fan of Sandra Bernhard and Taylor Negron, and a lot of really good monologue humorists who have this sort of, something they've created for themselves. If you've ever watched an interview with Oscar Levant, it's a completely self-generated version of themselves. If you can create a version of yourself that is not untrue, but you're sort of playing a character of confident you, then you don't have to feel personally responsible if it doesn't register very well. You're just like, oh well, that's the Tony Clifton version of me. And that worked for me. That got me out of feeling like I could fail at any time. It was just like, well, it's a version of me that's out there. It's not me. And eventually what happens is it's porous. And the real you is always, coming through that persona. Like people will figure out who you are. Like no one can ever tell when I'm angry. It's the worst thing. Like I'll be furious with someone. Like I'll give them 12 notes to do on a cut and come back 3 days later and watch the cut again and they've addressed nothing. And I just will start running in place and say, I'll be right back. I got to go outside for a second. And I'll literally run like a cartoon character out of the building down the stairs, do a lap around the block, maybe get a Snapple at the convenience store on the corner and come back. I'm like, whoo, good. I just needed to get that out. Listen, I gave you 12 notes. None of them are done. Tell me why they're not done. As opposed to just screaming and yelling at people, which is what a lot of people enjoy in this business, is the power to scream and yell at people. I'm not a screamer. I'm not a yeller. I'm let's do something so completely absurd that both of us forget this just happened. And it all settles itself in the end.
So when you talk about persona, if we watch old versions of the Dick Cavett show, there were all these personas that would come on, and they were amazing. And I feel like we don't have that as much anymore.
The Dick Cavett show is a wonderful thing to watch just as a character study. Just the way people behave themselves. I mean, Lily Tomlin walking off on, who was it? Someone had said something about, a beautiful woman being, the most difficult thing to possess or whatever. And he's like, possess? It's not, women aren't yours or whatever. And she just, Lily's like, I can't sit next to this guy. And she got up and she walked off. And it's like, oh, who would do something so outrageous? And it's like, it's not outrageous. It's just her drawing a line for herself. Lily's fantastic, by the way. If you're looking for role models, excellent choice.
Lily Tomlin. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go back and try to look at that old tape of that. How do you know someone is serious about working in this business?
That they will implement advice that is given to them. I can't tell you how many words I've probably expended into the ether with people who were looking for validation in that moment as opposed to something practical that they could put into practice, or that they want to fight with you about the advice that you give them. Well, Quentin Tarantino doesn't do this. And I'm like, well, the reason why he's Quentin Tarantino is because he's the exception to the rule. When I was in film school, all I ever heard about was how Robert Rodriguez made his movie he made that movie for $300,000. And I said, the music budget on El Mariachi had to have been more than $300,000 when it was released. I said, there's a point between where you start something and then someone comes in with a bunch of money to finish this idea you had. Like the Blair Witch Project, the myth is that it's a bunch of guys that were they did this thing and it turned into a big hit just by accident. Well, New Line got involved and somebody said, well, maybe you should show more of this lost footage than just doing it as a straight up talking heads documentary about something. And sure enough, the thing that scares the hell out of everybody is that last shot where somebody's standing in the corner and something awful's happened or is just about to happen and it scares your pants off. That was because of an exec, which is the other reason you should listen to notes once in a while and stop thinking, I'm an auteur when you haven't made anything yet.
What does it mean to, quote, look like you want to work?
Look like you want to work. For me, it's an old thing that I kind of got. When I was a kid, I used to read everything I could about the people who were really great successes. And like Lew Wasserman, who ran Universal for a long time. Lew Wasserman had his whole thing about, dress British, act Yiddish. And if you worked there, you're at MCA, you were going to wear a black suit and a skinny tie, and you were going to look good. I've done shows where my whole staff, back when I could suggest something like that, I would say, please wear a shirt with a collar to work. Please don't come into a band with a band T-shirt on, because I want us to feel like we're professionals doing a professional thing, and not the thing that we're doing because we're not making movies or things that we really feel like are what we're called to. Because to me, it's disheartening to see people that look like they live out of a glove box coming into the office every morning to work. Like, you got to just respect your peers, respect your work, act like an adult professional. And that's from guys like Lew Wasserman and Paul Fig, who I love to pieces. That man is wonderful and always the best dressed guy in the room.
Advice to those who want to start at the top.
Go soak your head in a bucket. There is no starting at the top. If you want to join the Army as a general, let me know how that works out when you go down to the recruiting office. Like, I'll join if you'll put me in charge of 200,000 people doing ground operations somewhere. It's like, that's not how life works. It doesn't work that way in the film or television business. We'd like to be recognized for our work. We'd like to be famous. We'd like to be loaded. We'd like to know what it feels like to make, $4 million a year. But there's a long road to get there. And I just had a conversation with a good friend about that today, who was talking about, she said, I don't really know what to do with my life. And she says, I'm your age and everything is sort of worked out for you. Didn't say it in so many words. It was more like and I just like, what do I do? And I said, whatever you want to do. I said, find something that you know that you like. Find a job that's adjacent to that and do it for a year and see where that year shows you things. I thought for a while between doing comic books and ultimately reality television, I said, I'm going to be a screenwriter. And I wrote every day, and I had so many spec scripts that were awful. I was doing what my friend Larry Katz used to tell me. He says, just get the mustard water out. It's like when you turn a tube of mustard over and it's like you get nothing but water on your sandwich. It's like so disappointing. It's like, just get the mustard water out and then just worry about where to apply the mustard. You got to get the mustard water out in your career, because you'll start in one direction and you'll start to see doors in that same hallway open to you and say, well, that's further down the hallway. That's close to the door at the end with the big star on it where you feel like you're somebody important. You got to just work your way down the hallway, and there's lots of doors and lots of offices and lots of other things you can do that are going to give you experiences that'll drive you to that. The more you know. When I started in reality television, I thought, well, I'm going to get stuck here. It's not a matter of being stuck. It's like I've become arguably like the guy to talk about story and structure in reality television. I've talked to Sid Field about it in my lifetime. I've had interactions with people who do all kinds of things. Ted Elliott, who wrote the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, said the most important thing about this business is understanding how your business works. You can't be in a business that you can't be bothered to learn how it operates. And that's good advice when you're getting started too. It's like, you got to learn about the business. Get up in the morning and, go through the HollywoodReporter.com, go through Variety, see who's making what, so you can be conversational if you run into one of those people or somebody they're connected to. I heard you're working on this is a great conversation starter. Or how's it been going with XYZ?
What kind of heart does it take to pursue this business?
A sturdy one. It's super important to want to do what you do, but resilience is a huge part of it. And you can't act like people are actively I hear this conversation like, oh, nobody wants to read my script because the studios only want to do the things that are safe. And it's like, yeah, they're like, whatever you do, don't buy anything from Jeff. There are no meetings where they're plotting about how to keep you excluded. It's a business. We made a movie like this, and it made $60 million. We'd like to make some more mid-range movies like this with a safe return. So right now, we're going to buy movies that are like this. It's not like they're going to look at your thing and say, this in and of itself does not have merit and it's crap. It's not how it works. They'll read it and they'll go, this isn't what we're looking for right now. Like for me, I keep a thing called The Brick, which is every idea I've ever had for a reality TV show that I was unable to sell at the time that I created it. Put it in a 3-ring binder, come back to it later. And I keep The Brick and I hear, oh, somebody's looking for a shiny floor game show that's like this or something that's in the vein of that. And I can go to The Brick and I'll have something ready that I can go in and pitch. So I have multi-generational game shows. I've got takeoffs on things that were already successful. There was a show that I created last year it was basically, I really loved making it. I thought that was a great show. I don't know if you've seen it or if you're familiar with it. Nick Offerman and Amy Poehler do like a crafting show where the people compete to build these different craft projects. And I said, well, what if you cross that with, which is the best phrase to come to when you're jammed and your brain doesn't work, is it's like this and this at the same time. So I was like, well, what if we did Making It and Project Runway? And we did a show that was all about trying to figure out how to upscale clothing that you find in a thrift store to make it look contemporary. And every week you got to dig through this big pile of clothes and make something that somebody has to wear and show off. Like, that'd be fun. Why not to pitch it? Oh, well, we're not really looking for shows like that. I would die to sit down with Paper Kite, the company that did that, and just run through that show. But if it doesn't sell, you just print a copy of your deck and you put it in the binder. And then 2 years later, you'll hear somebody at a table somewhere talking about how they wish they had something like X, Y, or Z. And then you say, well, I've got The Brick. And you go back to The Brick and you pull it out and you call your agency and get a meeting and hope for the best. And sometimes on the second or third time, something will go into development and maybe you'll get lucky. You won't get rich anymore, but you'll get lucky.
Well, if you enjoy what you do, though.
That's right.
Without sounding too cliche, but I mean, yes, money is important in
Well,
LA.
yeah, but also it's that thing where the spirit of what we do, like this much validation goes to here. Like I've got a scripted series, the first time I've ever done an attempt at a scripted series. That's been very well received. That I have some producers that I'm working with on right now and hoping that we'll be able to go out with it soon. It's based on one of my books. And it's like, it's a new stretch. It's someplace new to go. And just the validation of having someone say, that is an interesting idea. Like, it's like the carnival where like the lights run up to here and back down. You're just like, all I got to do is hit it hard enough again to get it to the bell. You know, it'll happen. And it won't happen tomorrow, which is the other thing that I would tell people who are just getting in. This idea that like, I'm going to pull out a spec script, I'm going to mail it to somebody on a Friday that didn't ask for it, and then I'm going to hear about it on Tuesday. Like, got your thing over the weekend, wasted my weekend reading it, but I like it. Not going to happen. It doesn't. And it's so much about building relationships that you have to give yourself time to build relationships, which, again, young people, they're not. The fact that I'm using the phrase young people worries me. Because old people do it too. They get this idea that like, well, I got this great idea and I can't get anybody interested in it. What's it about? Well, it's about Broadway in the 1920s. And you're like, oh my, like, do you not understand why somebody might not do that right away? Like it's about this woman, her name was Emma, and she was a costume designer in the 1920s. And I'm like, could be real interesting, but it's gonna have to have a lot of stink put on it for it to be something anybody wants to do. Gonna do a multi-million-dollar period piece about a seamstress. Like, tell me all about it. Just learn the business, understand what people want, and that it's cyclical. Every 7 years, you get a really great vampire movie. And that's just how it works. Because if one thing becomes successful, everybody's trying to mimic it. So there's going to be this, this rash of people buying obscure Amazon.com novels about vampires to adapt into screenplays. And then it'll be over again. And you won't hear about it again for 9 years because everybody will be so sick of all these properties that they bought that they couldn't figure out how to develop and move forward. Give yourself the time.
Well, things have sped up so much. So whatever end of the spectrum, age-wise someone is, everything's so instantaneous now.
Right.
So we all want this, and it's shoved in our face every day. This person's,
well, there's
so-and-so
that pressure,
here.
There's that pressure that we all feel and I know that when I started, the dialogue that was always running in my head is everybody had said, well, if you haven't made it by 30, it's not going to happen. Like in Hollywood, they love young people because they only develop young talent because they want to have a long career that they can make money off of you. That's why when you go to an agency when you're 65 years old and you've written your fantasy novel, it's a little hard for someone to say yes to that because they know that even if it's successful and they develop you out, you're going to work, 20 more years? It's a very tough thing for older people to break into the industry. You don't have to be 25 to have stars in your eyes. But still, I mean, it's not wanting it is not enough. You just got to launch yourself into how things really work and looking for those little doors, which is another thing Larry talks about a lot. I reference Larry Katz a lot. Larry was an AD that's worked with Gore Verbinski, and lots of other people. And he's a super talented guy, teaches at Full Sail University in Orlando. But he talks a lot about approaching show business like you go to this huge castle and you're just trying to figure out how am I going to break inside this castle? Like it looks like they're having fun. There's fireworks. There's people running around. Like I want to be in there. And you're always trying to figure out how to go through the front door. And what you got to do is watch the side and figure out where the little hidden doors are, where the gates are, where the windows are. And eventually, one of those little doors will open and you can run into that. There are people that get into this through all crazy different ways. Like Chuck that I talked about earlier, who did Movie of the Week for a long time, did TV movies. He got into the business, had a relative that was able to get him in with the finance department at Ziv. He didn't start out as a writer or a producer. He got in that little side door and worked his way forward. If you look at Norman Powell, who was a very successful producer of Westerns, he was the same way. His father was a very well-known film star, and he went to his dad and he was like, what can I do? How can I get started? And his dad was able to get him in to directing, and he eventually started directing episodes of Westerns and moved up and did a lot of films and other things. It's not always a straight path.
Do you have to really break in? Can you be invited?
Oh, a lot of people get invited in, but it's if you sit by the mailbox and wait for that to show up, it's not great. Like
Okay.
you'll get invitations when you've known people for a long time. Like it's like I talk about like the Hollywood party thing a lot. Is I didn't get invited to anything for years because nobody knew who I was, and then out of the blue, I got invited to some fundraiser that the Creative Artists Agency was doing. They didn't rep me. I didn't have anything to do with them. I just got invited. And I showed up, and it was this big thing that Carrie Elwes was putting on, that they were doing a benefit for some sort of a rainforest initiative that was going to keep people from drilling for oil or clearing for oil in this area where this group of indigenous folks were living. And how are we going to raise money to stop doing this? And I thought, halfway through this, we're all going to be asked to write a check. And I'm like, I am making nothing at this point in my career. But it was a great night, and I met a lot of people. I didn't become fast friends with all of them, but I knew some of them. And some of those people have asked me before to read things that I've written, or is there anything they can do to help me out? But it took me, years to get to the point where I would get invited to anything. And then later on, we talk about Allie Willis a lot. She actually credits herself as a lyricist and Hollywood party thrower, technologist, all these other crazy things. She's like a multi-hyphenate. But she's proudest of being able to throw parties because what she does is she loves connecting people who will then go off to do other things or potentially bring her on to do other stuff. And she had a wonderful career that all sort of worked through that way. She started out at Columbia Records in New York. She was an assistant who then ended up writing liner notes, who then left the company and tried to get a recording contract with them, did one album called Child Star that was not the best received album ever. It's a wonderful listen, but it was one of those things where it was a very personal effort that didn't just register like popular music would. And she got those opportunities because people liked her.
So if someone is invited to, let's say, a fundraiser or something where they know, like, this is worth my while to go,
Yes.
I may or may not be able to contribute, how should one conduct themselves?
I would tell you, when you go to a party like that, and there are big names everywhere, they are not there for you to run up and go, my name's Paul and I have this really great idea for a thing and blah, blah, blah. Or, oh, I love that movie you made 15 years ago and it's so great. Whatever you do, don't walk up to someone and go, you saved my life. That is everybody's favorite phrase. You saved my life and you don't even know it. These people get that on the street all the time. You are in a space where everybody in that space should be safe for them to interact with. So I like to go to people and say, oh, I know you. You're a friend of, like, even if I know who they are, I'll say, like, I met John Cryer at a Ralph's once, which is not
nice.
a big deal. I think he's a great actor and a neat guy. And I had just been at a play the week before, and I saw him there with an actress named Paget Brewster, who is somebody that I also enjoy. And I turned to him and I said, oh, I know you. I said, you're Paget's friend. I met you at the show at the Steve Allen Theater last week. And he goes, oh, hi, I'm John. I was like, no, I mean, I know who you are. I just remember you as a friend of Paget. I said, I didn't want to come up and go, oh, you're John Cryer. I figure you get that all the time. He's like, oh, yeah. I said, I'm actually going over to hang out with her right now.
So remembering, like you said, a safe space. So we're not there to pitch. Their IMDb doesn't really exist.
Right. It doesn't exist. It's worry about making a personal connection that's just like, oh, so-and-so, I'm taking acting classes with this person that you studied with in 1970. Or I know like this tangential thing about you that connects the two of us. Have a genuine conversation, circle around, meet them at the end of the night, and whatever they say, don't react badly. to anything someone says. There is an A-list comedy star who is A with a glowing halo around it that I met at a Christmas party years ago. And the interaction we had, I said, oh, hi, so-and-so. And I said, I've really liked you in such and so. And he says, oh, are you in the business? And I said, yes. I said, I work in reality television. And he said, oh, and then got real quiet. And then he punched me on the shoulder and said, someday for you, buddy. And I was like, dude, I have more completed projects than you do. Like in the number of hours, I had probably done 10 times the amount of time he spent on screen in a movie. Someday for you, buddy, was really offensive. Like it was not a blow off. It was a, oh, you're not really doing what I do. Like, yeah. You can't internalize that. The fact that I'm remembering this story 10 years later makes me feel awful. And I will never tell anybody who it was.
Sure.
But it's just that whole thing where it's just like, if you have a sour interaction with somebody, that's on you. Whatever happened, however they reacted to you, whether they were right or wrong, it's a thing that happened in that moment. And you are not at the point where you can afford to have grudges when you're starting out. You're just going to be like, oh, well, that's a funny story that I'll tell in 10 years when I've cooled off.
And is there a hazing? Is there a toughening up?
There can be, but mostly with people you don't want to work with. Most people I know who are very serious and adult and professional are super accommodating and very nice. I have a friend of mine who is an audio mixer who, when he was doing the final pass at Bridesmaids, said, why don't you come down to, we'll come down to Technicolor and we'll go out and we'll grab some lunch. And when we came back, Paul Fig was there to sit in on the mix. And I introduced myself to him. I said, I'm a friend of Mark's. I said, I wish I would have worn a better suit. I said, I feel like Herb Tarlick from WKRP in Cincinnati. I said, that is such a beautiful suit. And I'm here in this crummy blazer. I said, you just look like $1 million. Oh, thank you. And we don't interact that often, but when we do, it's always very pleasant. And he's a nice guy. And it turned out later on that he was a friend of my friend Allie that I talk about all the time. So one more thing we have in common. My book came out. I sent a box of them over to his office. If anybody might enjoy this, I don't expect him to read it. It's that thing where, I'm just trying to figure out how to keep in touch with people. Which, I'm so sorry, tangent. Send people cards. Anybody you've met that you feel an affinity with, send them a card when some new project comes out, just to let them know that you still think about them. I worked with Sean Hayes from Will and Grace one time on a show called Hollywood Game Night. And I still, whenever I see he's got something new, especially if it's something independent or small, I just saw Lazy Susan, which was a very strange movie that he's in. Very funny. So, I just saw Lazy Susan, I didn't even know that this was something that you had worked on. It just popped up on my Netflix and I loved it. And just drop a note in the mail. And that way, hopefully, the next time I bump into him, which 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I'll still be able to say, I sent you a card after Lazy Susan. And he'll go, I remember. He's the guy with the weird jackets and the crazy glasses that used to work on Hollywood Game Night.
You might see him in the produce section at Ralph's.
It could happen. I don't have the best time with produce sections at Ralph's. I mistook a very popular actor named George Weiner, who has worked forever. He's been in a lot of Mel Brooks films. I met him in the men's room at Musso and Frank once, and my brain shorted out, and I said, excuse me. I said, aren't you Ron Liebman, who's another actor? And he said, no, I'm not Ron Liebman, but he's a friend of mine, and I thought he was pulling my leg. And I said, well, then I won't say anything about Where's Papa. And this is the really weird part. George Weiner wasn't in Where's Papa. It was Ron Liebman. He was just wearing glasses similar to the ones that George was wearing at Musso and Frank, these sort of oversized Dior-style glasses. Years later, I ran into him at Ralph's. And I said, this is a funny story, but I owe you an apology. And he said, no, you don't. He says, I've told that story for years.
Oh, wow.
About this guy that kept telling me that thought I was lying to him when I told him I wasn't Ron Liebman. And I'm like, oh, good. Now we have a funny story.
So you made an impression in the men's room.
I made an impression.
Yeah.
Not a great one, but at least a funny one.
If you were interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. Do you consider today's film and television writers to be lazy?
I don't think so at all. May I ask you, is there a motivation for that question?
Oh, absolutely. Everything I ask, there's
Well,
a motivation.
I figured.
Hopefully it's the good intention, but in terms of repeating content, so if the content is kind of recycled and they know, like you said earlier, this movie works and it made this much at the box office, let's do another version of it.
Well, it's not the writer that's being lazy. It's whoever is commissioning that work that is saying, we want to knock off this, or we want to revisit this property, and here's what we want it to look like, which is the thing that happens a lot now, is every executive imagines themselves as a creative at some point. Like, I work on reality shows where sometimes I'll get a note back where it's like, oh, could they be like this? Or did she say anything like this incredibly specific thing? Like, if she didn't, let's go pick it up and let's get it. And it's like, why? And they're always afraid of the dumbest person on earth watching the show and not understanding what's happening. Like, we're not really sure people are going to be able to follow this. And I always say, like, were you able to follow it? And they're like, oh yeah, no, we totally got it. We're just worried that some people might not remember that this happened 3 minutes before. So I've never watched a movie that resets the plot every 10 minutes because it's so sure that people can't remember something that happened in Act 1. Whereas in reality nonfiction television, it's all about, like, did you forget this happened before we went to commercial? Let's play it again. Let's do a flashback. Let's do that. Like, they're very worried about attention spans in television in a way that they aren't in film. So it's not that the writers are lazy, recycling content or writing in a manner that suggests that they don't trust you as the viewer to be able to facilitate your own experience. It's not the writers.
So it's executives that see this works, this doesn't, and it's
right. And it's ultimately, they're able to look at it objectively from the point of it being product as opposed to something that's super, that's super personal to them. I might have told you this story last time. I don't want to recycle it. I don't want to be perceived as lazy.
It was 2014. That's okay. The world's changed.
I know,
it's totally
but,
different now.
People don't always remember that far back. That's a little further back than Act 1. There was a writer who had been working on a sitcom, and they had rewritten everything that this person had contributed all the way through this particular episode. And it got to the end, and they were going to take out a joke about waffles. And the joke about waffles was the bridge too far for this person. And they were just like, not the waffles. The waffles are staying. And it's like, what a hill to die on. It's like, my one joke, this last joke that I have in there that's mine, and you're going to take it out. I got news for you. Your checks are going to clear whether every word gets in or not. So enjoy the experience of writing and knowing that you're on something that's big, that's getting made, that people are watching. But don't take it so personally.
Why does it feel we're fed nothing but recycled content?
I think it's that thing I was talking about earlier, where it's just people in a business know a formula that has worked previously. They buy a lot of concepts from overseas, a show that has proven itself in Korea or Denmark or someplace else, or Israel. We got a lot of stuff from Israel. Adapting things for an American audience because it's proven itself somewhere else, so it's less likely to fail because they know they have an audience that received it well. They're willing to roll the dice on an American audience receiving it well. It is, in the end, a business that must remain profitable for all of us to continue to do what it is we do. So taking some of what they perceive as the guesswork out of it by copying a format or adapting this or that or trying to make it as much like this other successful thing as possible. It's just part of what we do. And there are very creative ways to work inside of that box that we sometimes get trapped in. I mean, there's still a lot of originality in a lot of adaptation. Like The American Office, when you watch that and you watch the original that Ricky Gervais was doing overseas, they're very much the same, but they are all very much their own thing. And that's why that show works.
Different humor styles, correct?
Mostly different. Right. I mean, there's some similarities in that a lot of the devices are repeated. That sort of faux documentary style, which I still can't invest in.
Oh, you don't like it?
When I watched The Office originally, and it was the American version. I had just done a film with Jenna Fisher called Lolly Love. And I just thought she was the greatest thing since they started making sliced bread. She was really funny and in a super subdued way. And it was this thing where I started to watch it and I thought, why would a camera crew be following an ordinary office around in that super contained environment where they can't go big, they can't have anything huge happen to anybody? And that turned into what was the most charming part of the show, was that it was small, and you get the idea that Steve Carell is performing for an audience of whoever the camera operators are. Like, you start to realize, like, that device, as restrictive as it is, opens an entire new world for people to play in. And it was great for him. So.
And also it embellished the office personalities, that if you've worked a 9 to 5 and you're watching this sort of mundane world happen, but within it, each one had its own role.
Yeah.
And so if Pam had more stuff dumped on her desk and she had to just kind of grin and bear it, and just the different politics that happened, but they were times 10.
Right.
I think it was enjoyable in that sense.
Yeah. And I like watching people make small worlds bigger. It's like they're just going to push on the walls until they blow out.
Can you talk about your role as a story producer and how that role has changed over the years?
Sure. The story producer, what we do, depending on, I mean, I've had a very post-centric career. I don't spend a lot of time in the field producing. I'm mostly trying to figure out how to take what comes back from the field and rearrange it into a show. Story producing has changed a lot in that when I started, back in the days of the Osbournes, where I was hired as a story producer and was then told, I don't hire people I don't know, by the person who was running the story staff. I became a dailies coordinator, which is a title I have never seen given to anyone else on a show ever. The Osbournes, when that show was originally done years and years ago, they shot for months and then went through the footage in a very genuine process where it was just about collapsing time and finding the stuff that was funny. And now everything is so rushed that you're almost on rails. It's like, we're going to go out there and we're going to get this beat, this beat, this beat, and this beat. Where it's not totally scripted, but it's like, we need you to have a conversation about this. That conversation happens, and then hopefully it falls into what you're hoping to be able to get back from the field. So you can cut it very quickly, get a rough cut out in 2 weeks as opposed to 8. The compression of time in actual production is kind of amazing. Like, I've done shows now where I've done, a 6 or 8 episode season, and I've cut it all in a month and a half. Like, it's just become, it's a total race to the finish. You don't get necessarily the same quality of product at the end that you might have in the beginning when you had enough time to really sift. Because this fallacy that you can shoot something and then review it all in real time and then start to edit. Is there a lot of people like, well, we need you to watch everything. Like, did you see the part where they did this? And it's like, that thing that's not in the notes, but that you saw in the field and spontaneously remembered? No, I didn't review that because I didn't know it happened. So you don't have enough time to really comb through things and find, you're not panning for gold like we used to be able to do because there's no time to do that. You have to edit very quickly. You take the biggest, noisiest chunks that you can find. It's changed a lot. And I think that on the network side, because things, as a byproduct of things being so compressed, the notes that you're getting are always about stakes and noise and how do we make this bigger than it is. We used to get a lot of notes on stakes, like, we don't understand what's so urgent here. How can we do? And the fix for that back then was you would get some music clip that sounded like pirates were coming over the wall, and you start playing that over a guy pouring coffee. You know something terrible is going to happen to him in about 30 seconds because that weird, ominous music is going to happen. So Linda's going to show up at the office and yell at everybody. That now would be like, have Linda go in and set everybody straight about the meeting that happened last week that they didn't invite her to. Like that's the beat we want. Get that beat. And then that's what comes back from the field in the first place. And it feels very tailored. And we talk a lot about the hand of the producer. A lot of the hand of the producer is in response to the hand of the network executive who wants this beat, and this beat to happen. And again, it's not any better or any worse. It's just different than it once was.
If we looked at the road rules, the beats how different would they be? How slow would it have been compared to today's hit show?
Well, a reality competition show has beats built in because your challenges are going to be X, Y, and Z. Your eliminations are going to be X, Y, and Z. I think one of the best examples of this ever is The Bachelor. It's like, you know, they're going to go out, they're going to have these dates, they're going to do these away dates, they're going to have the fantasy suite card or whatever it is they do. Everybody's getting a rose except for these 4 people who are going home. You hope that it's somebody you like on the show getting a rose, so you're invested, and they know after doing this for 30-something seasons that people are going to want to see these particular things happen. So they shoot to that. It's not like they ever had a spontaneous rose ceremony like, hey guys, we got 2 hours left. Let's just do a rose ceremony. Let's go out in the backyard and put up a jib and get rid of some people. Like, it doesn't happen. It's all very planned out. This day, this is going to happen. This day, this is going to happen. And it's a brilliant show. It makes me sad, but it's a brilliant show. So
Why does it make you sad?
it makes me sad. Like when I watch people get voted off, and I don't really talk about the behind the scenes on that show because I don't like to talk about The Bachelor. It's a very strange part of my history. But I can remember someone being voted off the show, and people get super invested in winning at some point. That it's not just about, I hope he picks me to stay. It's that the thing internally, like, I'm going to look like a failure if I get sent home. And then when that starts to be the driver and they get sent home, they just turn into a blubbering, snotty mess when they find out they're not going to stay. And it just made me feel bad.
Sure.
Like, I have a major empathy problem. Like, it's good TV. I know that crying equals ratings, which was actually on a plaque on a wall in an office that I worked in, not on The Bachelor, but at another production company. Crying equals ratings. I'm like, no. Like, I can enjoy a person and laugh and not need something terrible to happen to them for me to feel like I'm watching a reality show.
Are we making content too fast?
Oh, sure, we're making content too fast. I think that people who work in the industry shouldn't have to work 100 hours a week to satisfy a made-up schedule where someone says, we'd like to spend 60% of what it would take to make this production, so let's just all work ourselves to death and never take a weekend day off. We're just going to power through this and get it done, because it benefits no one. No one who's working in that industry most of the time is getting overtime. They're getting paid a flat salary for the week, and they're working into the weekends and over the weekends to satisfy these schedules that are that could be created with human beings in mind, but just aren't. You got to keep feeding the machine and get stuff out. It's part of the appeal of what I do with reality television, is because it can be produced faster than almost anything else. But, in the 1920s, when you were making movies and you had an 8-day shoot, and they were like, oh, we have 8 whole days to do this, 44-minute feature or 80-minute feature. That was quick, but now it's a little stranger.
Can you give us examples of a show that you built off a great character and then one where you started off a great premise?
I'll tell you my favorite from a character. There was a show that Bravo ran for many years called Flipping Out. I loved that show, and I was there from the ground. One of the first things I did on the show was I went out and we had lunch with Jeff Lewis, who was the star of that show, who is a really interesting guy who has actual OCD. And that was kind of the thing, was the show was about him and the people that work for him and how they deal with him having this very particular manner of doing things that is actually a medically diagnosed thing, and about how he tries to rein himself in but sometimes can't. And I thought he was just such an interesting guy that when we did the pilot for the show, there were so many times where we would turn in a cut of the show and the note would come back and like, the show is called Flipping Out. He's not flipping out enough. And I was like, he's such a real guy. Like, how do we satisfy the network, but we also, treat him like a person? And there was one scene, and I almost never fight anybody about content. They were kind of like underwhelmed by it. There was a scene at the end of the first episode where he goes to see his therapist, and the therapist folds this Navajo blanket up into a big square and puts it over his face and says, I want you to scream as loud as you can. And he says, I can't, under the blanket. And I was just like, my heart broke. I was like, I feel so bad for him that this is a real thing that he has to deal with every day, that he knows drives people that work with him nuts. But him just, I can't. Like, I thought that was like the most beautiful scene I ever had the opportunity to cut. It was nothing that I asked for. It was something that came back from the field as part of them following him as part of his day. And it just still, to watch that first episode, I get choked up when I see that, because I'm like, this is a real person having a real life experience who is not being reduced to a cartoon character of himself for the convenience of the storytellers. And that show went on, and progressively, you know, I got the feeling watching it in later seasons that there was a lot of playing things up for the camera. It might have been, it might not have been, it might have been just as genuine as it was when I started on that show. But we set that tone right, and you really felt like you knew him as a person. You have empathy for him. You start out sometimes where they, you know, the idea for the show is, oh, here's this guy who's constantly flipping out. And there's this push that, you know, you've got to have your heroes and your villains, so everybody gets crammed into this mold. Like, don't forget this person's the villain. Don't forget this is the good person who just has to suffer through the villain. And if you watch enough seasons of certain shows where it's just like, oh, well, you know, Carol's just like that, and this one character is just tearing into people unmotivated constantly, I always think, like, does she think that she's not going to end up in the show if she's not bombastic enough because she thinks that's what reality shows are? And that's the problem with reality TV being everywhere now, that it's just like, they want these crazy, nasty characters, but you can't understand why they are who they are. Like, there's a bunch of backstory that you're not getting into. Conversely, I think that characters who are entirely reliant on having had a backstory, it's very difficult doing a premise-based pilot for any show, scripted or unscripted. I don't need to know where this person went to 5th grade. I don't need to know that they sneezed once with a mouthful of taco and embarrassed themselves in front of a classroom. But there are some people that are like, yeah, we want to know the whole deal. Like, what's with this person? How did they meet their husband? How did they do this? And I'm like, I don't care what's happening right now. Like, I can figure out who a person is in the moment more easily than I can if you stop me down and go, I'm going to tell you everything that's happened in this person's life up until now. I can't. They're so slow, total snail's pace. Like, you know, they used to live here, but then they moved here, and then they moved to this other place, and that's where they met this person who's in the show. Does it matter if they're arguing over a topping on a pizza and they're married? No, I can meet them in the middle of that argument and figure out who they are watching that argument happen. That's super organic. Backstory is very inorganic. You're slowing the proceedings down by telling me everything about them before I start.
How do you know when you have a great idea?
For me, it's when it tickles me, when I laugh, when I am in the middle of watching something down and the people start to feel like people. There's a point where reality television, the most important thing in what I do has always been, it has to feel authentic. And you can, the irony of saying this out loud, you can fake authenticity to a degree, but when it's the real deal and you're really invested in someone's success, that to me is like when I'm having fun. And when I'm having fun, I know the product's going to be good because I feel like it'll catch on, and whoever has to review that and sign off and give notes hopefully will experience the same thing that I'm feeling organically watching it.
What elements make a great idea?
The fact that when it's saleable and it fits in a box, even if it's its own box. When people come to me and they're like, I have an idea that nobody's ever done before, my initial reaction is, bleh. Like, I know what this is going to taste like. Like, what's it going to be like when, you know, somebody else sees it and goes, well, this doesn't fit our schedule, or this isn't the flavor of programming that we're looking for right now. It's not always completely about originality. It's about knowing that it fits somewhere and knowing that it'll resonate. I especially like things that are projects that I feel will resonate with fans of other shows that I like. Like if I did a show right now that felt like The Office, I would be thrilled. I often compare even unscripted shows. Like I try to figure out what the brothers and sisters of that show are like. Like not Unsung, I'm sorry. What was Unreal? Was the show that they did about reality television. And I couldn't watch more than 2 episodes in a row because I'd get sick to my stomach that it was like picking apart the kind of thing that I do for a living, but it was super engaging. And they had the the producer that had kind of an over-the-top personality, who was very interesting, but was definitely like an alpha type guy. You had executives that were on this fictional show that I would say, oh, that reminds me of so-and-so. Oh no, like that's like, is this a straight parody of the show? Like it's too close. And I was I got invested in that, and I felt like this is a show that really nails the feeling of how I felt working on this other thing. And if people love this thing, they're going to love this other show. If I do anything that feels like something else, like the clothing show I was telling you about earlier, if it felt like as much fun as making it, if it ever got made, I would not be surprised, because the whole time I was writing up the deck to pitch that show, I was just laughing out loud. I had people attached to that. It was my hosts. If I pitched it, I always pitched with a host attached, even if the production company says, no, we don't like that guy. And for me, like I had pitched it, and I had Daniel Francesi, who played Damien in Mean Girls, attached as a host, and Erica De La Cruz, who is the publisher of LA Girl magazine, who is quite the fashionista. I took her to the Emmys one year, and she ended up in something, I think it was the Paris Vogue. She had worn a yellow dress, and she walked the carpet, talked about the designer, and it's just like, she, at that time, was not a huge celebrity, but she's so personable and so energetic, and she's now got a social media following to beat the band. Like, you wouldn't believe how well she does on TikTok. And I thought, well, if these two said yes and they would do it, I can go in and not only have a great idea, but have it fairly well fleshed out, so that if somebody said yes, I'd like make these 2 calls tomorrow, and you've got your hosts, and then just let's get moving. If it feels good enough that you can visualize it happening, as opposed to just feeling the sort of therapeutic whoosh of like, oh, I got something out of me, that's what you hope for.
This is along the same lines, but what can you do to test your idea?
I used to say talk to your friends in the industry. I don't necessarily recommend that anymore. I've had a couple of shows that I've presented that felt eerily similar to things that my friends have created. And I know it's incidental, and that ideas are everywhere, and execution is 100% of the deal. But it still sort of feels like, I don't want to be too verbal about this, because you can talk an idea away. You can lose your passion for something by repeating it to too many people. So when you create something, be excited that you finished your screenplay, be excited that you finished your pilot. Don't feel like you have to show it to everybody you know and get that instant rush of, oh, they liked it too. Because that doesn't help. I mean, they're not paying to read it. You're not going to make a living off of writing something and showing it to your friends. Write it. If you're working with a consultant, show it to a consultant who has done it before and knows what they're doing, and listen to their feedback. Your friends don't know what works and what doesn't and what's of the moment, unless they're people who are working in that industry.
I appreciate you saying the part about, be cautious of who you show it to, because I think there's like these 2 camps. There's those that think that, oh, nobody does this, and then there's others that, and then I think that there's somewhere in the middle. And look, Steve Jobs was paranoid for a reason. They say that he didn't want people to know certain things, and
But you also can't work in this business if you're paralyzed by the fear of someone stealing something that you've created. And ultimately, if you've created something really good, it should click so easily with people that anybody in their right mind would go, oh, that is a great idea. But if they think, oh, that is a great idea, and 2 years later they come up with something that's almost the same thing because it's just in the back of their mind somewhere. The few shows I've had where I've pitched a show and then I see it on TV later, I've never said, that person stole my idea. I say, oh, maybe that was running around in the back of their head. So it must have been good. And ultimately, you just have to figure out a way to filter it and say, well, it is a good idea and it lived, so I feel validated that it happened, whether I made a penny from it or not.
Do you like to start with great characters or a great premise?
I always start from premise, and characters are almost easy because what I do when I write, particularly the fiction efforts I've tried, is when I write, I can basically cannibalize the entirety of human existence that I have filed in the back of my head. Do you remember your first grade teacher that had that weird voice that always used to do this and had this quirky thing and only talked about this? That is a character that you can shove into a great idea. And then it becomes easier for you to write because you're basically pretending that these people are talking to each other. And then the dialogue feels natural, the characters feel more fleshed out. That's the thing. Like I wrote a book called 100 Poems About Los Angeles. Every single poem in that book is based on a real interaction I've had. I had a homeless man practically assault me in a sushi restaurant when I was in Hollywood that came in, and he walked up to the counter and he goes, "I'm going to have this and that and the other, and that guy's going to pay for it." And he looked at me like he was waiting for me to fight him. And I said, "Whatever." And the guy was kind of put off. And he's like, "I bet you feel really good about yourself." I'm like, "I guess I do." What's it to you? And he was almost upset that I was enjoying, the interaction. And that's one of my favorite pieces in the book. It's based on a real guy, just like if I read a fictional thing. He's actually a character in the pilot that I'm writing that's based on that book.
And what happened? Did he take his food and go?
No, he ended up coming over and he sat down with me because I would not give him an inch. And I said, "You want to sit down?" He goes, "I have a name." And I said, "What's your name?" He said, "I'm Troy." "I'm not going to tell you." This whole thing, this whole weird kabuki that he had going on in his head about he was going to show this guy by making some stranger pay for his dinner. And it's like, I didn't care. I'd rather you be eating that than walk down the street and spend, $3 on something that's not nutritious and not good for you. A nice sushi meal is always something that makes me feel good. So enjoy it. Make yourself feel good.
When you're creating a show, what structure do you use and why?
I typically I create a deck for reality television shows. It's basically like a glorified PowerPoint presentation in a printed format. I'll do a thing where it's just like, here's the log line, here's the summary, here's a beat-by-beat breakdown of a sample episode, and I'll usually come up with enough ideas for the first season. And I call it the also page, because everything is, so-and-so does this, also, here's the B story. This happens, this happens, this happens, also, here's the B story for that episode. And that's as far as I go. I don't really get into the nitty-gritty of it. If I'm doing a scripted show, I'm going to write a pilot, and I'm going to write the same sort of a breakdown. Like, here's a first season of the show with all of the things that are going to happen here. This happens, and then also this happens. So they're just very basic summaries of what would happen in the episodes. I know people that have written entire first seasons of shows when they go out to try to sell it, like, here's the first 13 episodes. I can't imagine being an executive who can't wait to get my fingers in the fudge, getting 13 episodes and going, whoa, if I do that, then this will change this. And then there's no opportunity for anyone else to have any input on what the thing is. And people are very often, especially when I talk to young writers, they're very big on, like, how do I keep people from messing around with my stuff? And it's like, you don't have any clout yet. Like, don't write it so it's so hard that you can say, oh no, that's not what this is about. And you never do that. James Pondy, who I learned screenwriting from, who was a big writer for Nickelodeon, the Mickey Mouse Club, and all that other stuff, he was my instructor when I was at Full Sail University. And he used to talk about what he called the motorcycle thing, which is, I have an idea for a movie, and it's about this girl who goes to a prep school or does whatever, and the executive will say, the network just signed a deal with Yamaha. We need to feature their motorcycles in every episode. Is there any way you could make this a show about a group of kids that ride motorcycles? Your answer in the room isn't, no, that's not what this is about. It's about, well, yeah. And then there you just start spitballing about how you're going to make this work. Because again, as I will repeat for the 500th time in this interview, it's a business. You're satisfying a checklist. Like, if somebody wants to buy shiny floor game shows, don't come in with a game show that's not set in a studio, because that's not what they're looking for. If they're looking to showcase something, or if they're looking for something of a certain flavor, learn how to tailor yourself to the needs of the buyer. Like, you want to write the kind of things they've already made, the kind of things they've already done. If I have a meeting with a production company, I'll usually go over any of my materials and figure out how I can make it a little bit more like something else they've already sold somewhere. Because then they'll say, we know how to sell this kind of thing, so it's more our speed.
Sure, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to abandon the prep school idea.
That's
somehow
exactly right.
She goes somewhere, she sees someone on a motorcycle,
yeah,
and somehow that weaves into her story or something.
Right. She's had this very uptight life going to private schools, and she's decided she's going to let her hair down, and
right.
she's going to join this bunch of girls that ride motorcycles at her. There's a million solutions for it, but you have to satisfy an end buyer, which you got to know that that's how you sell stuff.
So an and but.
Yes.
And but. Yeah, okay, I like that. Why does this structure work so well?
Because it's familiar. I mean, people are used to seeing decks in that format. And even very simple decks are super effective. A great example for a scripted series, John August, who has written Big and Big Fish, and a lot of other very successful things, has samples of his decks and materials for a series that he created called DC that you can find on his website. And I always use the same format that he writes his summaries in. He wrote like a very light treatment that I literally will steal that exact same breakdown and use for anything that I pitch, because it's a nice, very simple, very direct, easy, short treatment. It's only it's a few pages long. I think at max it's 7 pages. And it gives a very thorough idea of what the show will be about in just sort of a light, straight narrative format. Here's what this show is. These are the characters, and these are the themes that this show explores. And it's super effective, and it's also the reason why I like books like Save the Cat is because it's a blueprint. Like, this is a great way to write something that will be easy for people to understand and easy for people to grok, to get the overall idea of what the show's about. But to see what the themes are is really helpful.
And the themes, or maybe this isn't part of the theme, but there's going to be product placement that somehow needs to be woven into the theme?
No, the theme would be like, it's about how families interact with each other and how people fall out of touch and then find each other again after years, and how that's just the natural cycle of being in a family. Is you're close to people and then you're not, and then you find them again. That's the kind of a theme that you would see in a write-up like that. It's not the example from DC, but it's one that I've used before.
Sure, but if the showrunner says, we have this advertiser and sponsor of the show, and we need to incorporate...
that's going to come way after you've written this treatment.
Oh, I see. But
when you're writing something to get someone engaged, like Ellen Sandler once said, she said, Everybody Loves Raymond. The show is about food, sex, and how we don't interrupt the flow of either. And if you watch the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond, it's really about, how Ray's mother thinks that his wife can't cook, so she's always bringing things over. And Ray doesn't want to screw up the relationship with his mother by defending his wife, so there's always this weird line that he's trying not to cross with both of them because he knows he's going to disappoint one or the other. And at the same time, he knows that if he doesn't appease his wife, that it's going to be sort of a lonely, cruddy time in the house while she's mad at him. But I mean, a very simple way to describe that show again is, it's about food and sex and how we don't try not to interrupt the flow of either. That's the theme of that show, and probably why the production company is called Where's Lunch.
How many story beats does a reality show have?
Oh, it depends. I would usually say that you can get in a 44 to 48 minute show, which is an hour-long show. You can play maybe 12 to 16 scenes maximum. How you break those down doesn't matter so much. You'll get a thing that's called a clock from the network, where they'll say the first act should be 9 minutes long and should cliffhang out, and then you should come back after that. And then the second act should be this long, because if we add those 2 times together, we will always sweep the half hour, which we still talk about, sweeping the half hour, because people don't have a chance to look at other channels between acts because there's nothing new starting. They've already missed the first 4 minutes of something else if you've swept the half hour.
Can you explain what that means, sweep the half hour?
Sure. That just means if you're doing an hour-long show, the last thing you want to have happen is for you to hit the half hour when another new show is starting halfway through your program. You don't want people to tune out and see what else is on TV because you have a commercial break exactly on the half hour. So sweeping the half hour just means that you are trying to put enough content in the first 2, sometimes 3 acts, so that there is no break that happens at the 30-minute mark in your show.
How much time will you spend working on the beats of a show?
I do cards on the wall, which is how most scripted shows are done, where every time I know I have a scene in the field, it'll be like, Jerry goes shopping for a dress, And that goes up, and it's like, I know that if I do this as one of the first 4 beats, that I can continue that in Act 2. There's another beat where somebody reacted to the dress that he bought for his daughter, in Act 3, and how he has to rectify whatever disaster he's caused by buying her the wrong dress in Acts 4, 5, and 6. And it's just arranging cards on the wall the same way that anybody will tell you to structure a screenplay or a scripted show. It's all the same. The processes are very similar. And reality television works best when it mimics the structure of traditional scripted television that people have been familiar with their whole lives.
Can you build out the beats of a show?
Sure. In Act 1, you're going to set up your A story. If you can, your B story. I usually wait for C stories until later because people have already registered what's important and they know to follow that. So you'll have, in your first act, you'll have maybe 4 scenes tops, like if it's really cooking. So, you've got your setups for those 2 things. A minor story, and I call these moment stories, even though that is not a proper term for anything. That's where something happened that an executive thought was entertaining on set, and they often mistake an engaging moment for a story that you should follow. Like, so-and-so has decided to go to film school. And they have a conversation about how they're going to go to film school. But they don't go to film school for another 3 months. They've just decided they're going to go to film school. And they're like, we want to follow them going to film school. Well, not a lot of that happening in the first episode. So you'll have 1 beat of the least important story that you'll stick in there or at the top of Act 2. Which is if you have a freestanding scene that doesn't mean anything that you never hear from again, I always stick it at the top of Act 2 because nobody cares what happens at the top of Act 2. Unless you have a big fight at the end of Act 1 and then you want to see how it resolves itself. I will rearrange those cards forever and just make sure that everything feels sequential, that every storyline has a minimum of 3 to 5 beats in order to feel strong. Sometimes you'll have to take a scene that comes in from the field and break it into parts as if it's playing at different times. You just can't see those characters in any other scene work between that and the next beat, or it won't feel like it's the same thing moving forward. There aren't a lot of super hard and fast rules for structuring. I just play it by ear. Acts 4, 5, and 6, I like to keep them a little shorter than earlier acts if I have any say in that network clock. If I say, I think 4, 5, and 6 are shorter, it creates this artificial feeling of everything's moving faster towards a climax. If you have an act that's 4 minutes long and all your other acts are 12 minutes, 9 minutes, 7 minutes, then it's like, oh, we're really trucking now, like everything's really moving, and it's completely an illusion. It's like standing next to a car with like a photograph of the countryside going, whoa, whoa. It's just a trick of the mind to make you feel like things are moving. Acts 5 and 6 are for resolving a story, if you're going to resolve it in that episode, or for setting up the big noise in Act 6 that's going to make you come back for the next episode.
How much of a reality show is written before it's filmed?
I would tell you that most reality shows start with an outline. It's often for the benefit of the network, just to show them there is a possibility that these things could happen, and if they do, we know how to deal with them. So it's like, so-and-so tells someone this person objects, it becomes a huge argument, and then then we're going to go out to lunch at this restaurant, and they're going to resolve the big beef that happened in the first thing. That outline gets thrown out the window the minute you actually start shooting, because you're trying to get those particular beats, but you're not telling people, do this and then do this. Nothing is scripted that tightly, even on shows that are really compact. The only exception to that would be, I would say, like a home renovation show. You're always going to be like, oh, this house is a disaster. Oh, we've spent so much money doing it. We're going to do this. And then the crazy artificial stakes that make me crazy, which is, well, we just bought this house and we're going to flip it and we're going to have a showing in 6 days. No, you're not. You're not going to finish this house in 6 days. You're going to finish it in 6 days for the show. You're going to call it 6 days. But it's not like you're going to go in there and paint it. You're going to follow every action that happens to make it move forward. And then you're going to break it up into pieces that look like it happened over 6 days. Even if it's a month's worth of work.
So if, let's say, you're going into a record company and you're
Yes.
going to be filming the dynamics of the office and different
Right.
clients that they take on, you're allowing those things to happen naturally, or you're peppering in conflict?
You have natural things that you know will be happening. Like you're going to say, you're going to talk about how the last quarter wasn't very good, and you're going to tell somebody about how you need to sign an artist that actually has a chance in hell of selling a record. Like those are the conversations you need to have. And then those things will happen naturally based on a cue. Because like if I told you, I said, I want you to tell me about the last person you had a big argument with. And you would tell me who the person you had an argument with was. And I said, you're going to go to lunch with them on Thursday. That's how light the touch is. We're going to fly that person in, you're going to have lunch with them, and you're going to try and resolve your thing, because the show is called Resolutions. That's what it's about. You're going to have this conversation. It'll happen naturally. The person will either interact with you with a positive result or not. And if they don't, we'll just continue trying to have you resolve that or figure out ways to resolve that until we have enough stuff strung together that we can make a show out of it. With sitcoms, the A story is really the thing that continues through the season. Like if you were watching Cheers, like are Sam and Diane going to get together, is an A story that carries through an entire season of a show, as opposed to starting the show with the A story and wrapping it up at the end of that show. So, the big premise could be, there's going to be this big charity fundraiser, and so-and-so and so-and-so are arguing. Is she going to be able to get her to come to this fundraiser because then these other people will come, or whatever it is? And you visit that very lightly over the course of the entire season. And then, of course, your big finale is this celebrity-laden event that you can cover that looks like a great big thing, and that people are either going to show up and fight, or they're going to show up and resolve their differences, and then you have a nice button to the end of that season. It's not self-contained like if you're doing a film or a drama series or something like that.
So when you did the Wolfgang Puck series,
Yes.
you knew you were going to go into these big celebrity-laden events and there would be high-stress stakes?
Well, you would assume that would be happening. I didn't have much to do with that show. I was gone pretty quickly. They had done a cut, and then one of the executive producers got a little bit more involved in the cut and wanted to recut it himself. And so basically kind of went back to square one and undid some things that I did, which is not a bad thing. It happens. There are different types of executive producers. There are ones that are very hands-on. And then there are guys that hire me, and then I work with them for 3 days, and then they go on vacation, and you don't hear from them again for 15 weeks when you've turned the episodes into the network already. And they call you and they go, great job, we just watched the cut that was up online. And then you don't have any interaction with them at all, because they're there to set up the show and to try to sell the next show, which is the other very important thing I would tell you for longevity in the industry as a creator. It's about getting the next thing sold and getting the next thing made. You're not waiting until the end of a project to go out again. You're hoping that there's enough momentum behind that project or enough word of mouth going around that project that you are a hot property in that moment, and that you take your other meetings and you try to sell other stuff so that when that finishes, you're rolling into the next thing that you've sold already.
Hence, isn't that Mike Medavoy's book? Forgive me if I'm butchering the title, but You're Only as Good as Your Last.
You're only as good as your last one. Well, that, for him, he had a really interesting career. And I say had, he still has an amazing career.
He's still going.
He hasn't stopped at all. But if you look at how many things that he's been in charge of and how many things he's founded, he was involved with TriStar over at Columbia. He ran Orion, which is one of my favorite studios. He did huge, wonderfully successful movies. And he also made Weird Al Yankovic's UHF, which was not a big money winner, but a fun movie. And one that I would be proud to talk about if I had anything to do with it.
But the concept is that, you are as good as your last whatever. I mean,
that's right.
That's kind of like your next bill to work.
Yeah.
Not bill so much, but that's your stamp of like, okay, we can take him to the next one.
We know that he makes money. We know that the project he's affiliated with make money. And my appeal and my longevity, I attribute to the fact that I can bring a show in on time, under budget, in a manner where it's a story that makes sense and looks good. And that keeps me going. So far, 22 years so far. So
Congratulations.
So far, so good. Yeah.
Why is it hard for creators to talk about theme?
I think because theme is like the ultimate distillation of any program. And reductions, for anyone who's ever cooked anything, are hard because they take time and you have to really think about it. And then stuff sort of evaporates away and you're left with this concentrated thing, which is theme. Theme is the balsamic drizzle. If I have to give you an example.
I like it.
Trying to get to the most incredibly distilled version of anything. Like if you thought log lines are hard, try and explain thematically what an entire show is about. It's about the relationships we have with our pets. Like, okay, like that's very simple. And, coping with loss. Like these are the themes of the show. How connected we are with our pets, how we deal with loss. So we know that it's going to be about a veterinary clinic and it's going to be about how people react to, knowing that their best friend is going away. It's a very simple way of saying what every single episode of that show is going to be about at its core. It's hard to do. And that's the thing about writing is I think most people think writing is so-and-so opens the door. This happens, this happens, this happens. This noisy thing happens. This incredible thing happens that we can't afford to shoot. And then this thing happens that would be impossible to create in real life. And that's writing. Done. But just, thematically, that tells you what every writer who works on that show has to remember, that that's the central, feeling that you're trying to get out of the episodes that you're writing. It's just hard to do.
Is it easier with scripted television or?
It's easier. I haven't worked in scripted, so I don't know. I've attempted to write scripted, but I've never sold anything or been staffed anywhere.
Okay, well, if we take Dancing with the Stars, sorry to cut you off,
sure,
but what is the theme of that?
Well, the theme of Dancing with the Stars, I think, is that anybody can apply themselves and learn something new. Like I can't even begin to imagine what kind of enrollments at Arthur Murray happened after the first season of that show. When people were like, well, look at these people. They're having the time of their lives. We could do that. I think any good reality show that's a competition is, well, I could do that. You play at home and you go, well, that guy's kind of an idiot. He can't remember everything I just saw him do 3 minutes ago. Well, that 3 minutes ago was Monday when he got the new dance and he'd never done it before. So, it's an invitation for you to try to do something new in your life.
Is theme a big part of creating reality TV?
It is. There are a lot of reality shows where I look at, they'll do like vision boards for the show. And it's like, here is the color palette. Like the same way they do for a movie. Like, here's the color palette and what it means. And it's like, you're never going to be able to shoot to your color palette on a reality show because you don't have that much control over the environment or what people wear. Like they'll get a note that's like, please don't wear anything with a logo on it. And they can't even do that. Like the first time somebody shows up in like I worked on a show called On the Road with Sugar Ray. And it was like a competition with these people that were going to be like tour support for the band. Like
I remember Sugar Ray. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there was a kid that was on the show that had a yellow satin jacket covered in patches with the logos of all the major Negro League baseball teams. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you shot with him with all these logos. And the producer I was working with was just like, those logos are all for, disbanded ball clubs. Like there's nobody monitoring that. I mean, somebody owns all those logos. We can't just do that. And sure enough, you watch the show and he looks like the sun in the Jimmy Dean commercials because he's a little yellow blob that's blurred out so you can't read the patches.
Well, the errors and omissions insurance, that would factor into...
I think errors and omissions probably would have covered it. But I know that there were at least versions of it that were sent out that had all of those blurred. I don't know what they did in the end because I never saw the show when it aired. I just saw it in the office in the state that I handed it over to the finishing editor.
How does a writer incorporate theme into their stories?
I think it's fairly simple. It's like if you're going to make a birthday cake, you're like, this is going to be colorful and I'm going to have a bunch of candles on it. The end. Like, if you have a basic idea of like what your tone is going to be or what you're trying to achieve with it, it'll naturally sort of come out of it that way for you. Like it's not a real struggle like, oh no, that's not in keeping with the theme. It's like, in the beginning that this is about fathers and daughters. It's about whatever, the very obvious thing is going to be. Like it's every Diane Keaton movie I've seen for the last 10 years. It's like about a mom who can't let go, or it's about And then 15, she takes 15 cakes to the face in, I forgot what the name of the movie was. Matt Champagne was a great actor, underrated. What was the name of that movie? It kills me. My girlfriend and I still laugh about it. We went to see it years and years ago, and every time something happens in a TV show that just is like a total clam, like doesn't work, we just look at each other and go, "Oh no!" Like the Diane Keaton cake in the face.
Well, you talked about vision boards or different, color palettes. It reminds me of the 80s. The women used to get their colors done.
Yes.
And you were a late spring or a summer. And then
you're in autumn.
Right.
Yes.
And you knew don't wear anything with warm tones because it's not going to match. So it sounds like that's similar in a sense that you have this palette and it doesn't have to just be color, that this is what the show is about.
But I think a lot of times in helping, there's a lot of stuff that you help executives visualize that may or may not ever be applied. It's sort of like you're helping them to imagine this as a thing that's happening. That's what a good deck does, is it's giving you an idea that like, well, if you did this, we have thought about it. And that's all that you're really showing anybody. It's not like everything on the set is going to be painted, blue and then like crimson.
But an emotional theme as well.
Yes.
Right. Okay. What mistake do writers make with theme?
They forget about it. I think there's a lot of writing, at least from early stage writers, people who are looking to get in, that reads like you're falling down the stairs because there is no thought about the through line. There's the story. There's going to be fight scene, car chase, big kiss, unnecessary sex scene that doesn't pan to the drapes, which is all you need to do. And then the end. So, like the end might as well be, now send me my check. That like first time writers are all imagining that, that $1 million sale that is not going to happen on your first script, which is a sales tool. It's the other thing that new writers need to know. It's not about your spec. It's about creating a sales tool that says, I can write, so that they can go back to you and go, oh, great, we're making a movie about this line of toys. And this sample script is great, and we don't want to pay somebody known to do it. So let's get this nobody to do it for, WGA minimum. And then you get hired and like, we're going to make the Rubber Rabbits movie about this line of toys that we call the Rubber Rabbits. And the Rubber Rabbits do this, and that's all you need to know. And come up with a script because we can't. And you get hired to write a specific thing. It's not all about the spec scripts.
And you've written so many books in the meantime. So
I'm finishing my 7th book right now.
This is another poetry book, or this is a book on writing?
This is another book that goes back to the industry. It's called Slump.
Oh, okay.
And it's about what to do as a creative person during that month or 3 between projects, or when you have no idea when the next project is coming because there was nothing lined up when you finished the last one.
That sounds great.
Because it is horrifying if you have no idea what's happening or you haven't done it before. Like I can remember sitting in my office at LA Center Studios when MTV Sphere was wrapping up. And I sat at my desk and I just cried because it's like, this is it. I'm never going to work again. This is in 2001. 21 years ago, I was like, oh, I'm never going to work again. And now I've done 47 shows.
Wow.
You have to figure out, the aerial view of your career is lots of dots and dashes. And hopefully you have way more dashes than dots, in that you get to work for a long period of time and then you don't work. And then you come in on a project for a week, or you come in on a project for 3 days, and then you find another job that's going to last, 2 months or 3 months. And that's just the way things are in the freelance universe. It's going to be feast or famine. You're going to buy a house, and then you're going to be terrified that you're going to lose the house. You're going to buy a Mercedes, and then you're going to be like, I'm going to lose the car because I spent all this money and I didn't plan. I didn't know what to do when things were down. I have had so much money wash over my hands on huge projects where I'm just like, this is great. And then I invest, and then I immediately have to pull the money back out because for 3 months, nothing happens because there wasn't anything going.
Do you think that if we're in a slump, and this is probably you're going into this in your book, and forgive me if I'm revealing parts from it, but that we need that fear because there's some people that believe in, this is going to sound very airy fairy, but the abundance of the universe, and sometimes those people, they're waiting a little too long for things.
That is true, and I also think that there is an idea that once you have momentum, you will always have momentum, and it just doesn't work that way. It's there, if you're not actively leaning into things all the time, which is if you read Medavoy's book, I mean, that guy's always got something going on. If you can't stop and breathe, and it's really hard for me to even savor a success because I'm like, it's such a short period of time that you get to say, oh, the numbers are good. Oh, this is happening because you haven't been working for a month. Because Post has been polishing the thing that you submitted, and you don't waste that. Don't waste the time between something ending and whatever you hope is coming down the pike, and you getting out to try to look for something. There is no time to just sit. On the other side of that coin is give yourself the opportunity to savor the wins. I didn't do that.
Okay.
And I paid the price for that. I worked. 29 years, I took one vacation. In 21 years, I took one vacation, and it was to go to my roommate's destination wedding in Barbados. And you've never seen anybody so stressed out on a cruise ship.
That was you?
Yeah, I was just vibrating the whole time I was on the ship, just like, oh, God, I gotta get back. And I couldn't I was at sea, so there was no cell reception unless you wanted to pay out the nose. And it was just like, I can't. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, we gotta get back. And it was 10 days. If you can't take 10 days off once every 10 years, you deserve what happened to me, which was I had a stroke. And that put me on my butt for a month and a half. Mm-hmm. And I was in no condition to work for probably a month or two after that because I was trying to figure out how to get my left arm back, which was a little more important to me than, getting on to the next thing. You got to take care of your instrument, and that is you and your brain. So be nice.
Great point.
As Larry says, eat well and get a good mattress. That's what he tells all of his students when they graduate. It's like, eat well and get a good mattress, and you'll be fine. Because the quality of your sleep matters, and what you put in your body matters.
And
preach. I'm sorry.
No. I think it's important to share your story if you're willing to. I mean.
Well, yeah. I had a wonderful agent for many, many years, and she was always like, well, if you let anybody know you've ever had any kind of a medical issue, then it's going to be this whole big deal about whether you're going to be reliable on the shoot and this and that and the other. And I said, I'd rather people know that I can't work an infinite number of hours for you because A, it's not necessary, and B, it's not good for me. I like good TV, but I'm not willing. I don't want to die for it. I haven't come up with a clever enough epitaph to be dead yet.
Don't go on a cruise.
Don't go on a cruise.
Because you're going to worry. But what if you did go on the cruise and hadn't worried?
Would the
job still have been there?
The Maria Bamford joke that she told 15 years ago, which is she takes on these personalities in her comedy. She says, this is me and my agent on the phone. She's like, Maria, you can't go on vacation because I had a client that went on vacation for 2 weeks. And do you know what he does now? He drives a rickshaw. Like they just forgot about him in 2 weeks. And it's like, it's not quite real, but it's close enough to real that it's like, if you can't go off the map. So if I'm not working, I'm sending people cards or I'm, trying to have lunch, which is a real thing. Like the Hollywood Let's Have Lunch isn't about, let's go hobnob with famous people. It's about, let's make sure I don't get forgotten.
Well, you had an interview with a gentleman who said, and I don't know how true this is, but find 4 restaurants.
Yes.
And go to those 4. You want to tell us the story?
Yes, is one of the earliest pieces of advice I got. I always, when I meet a big producer, I say, what's the best mid-career advice you have for a producer? I don't want to know how to break in. I'm in. Like, what's the best mid-career? And he said, do you have your 4 yet? I said, what 4? And he goes, you need 2 great restaurants and 2 dumps. And then one of those on each side of the hill, meaning Beverly Hills, the Valley, It says, only go to those places for 20 years. And he goes, and what that does is if you ever have to take a meeting, you say, why don't we meet at such and so? And everybody there knows who you are. So you get treated like the Pope when you come in. They're so excited to see you. How nice to see you again. Da, da, da. You have a regular table somewhere if you can do that, because it makes you look like you have some kind of power and presence in town. And it sounds silly. I mean, I told that advice to somebody once and they were like, that is the most vain thing I can imagine. It's like, well, I have a regular table at such and so. When Gary Marshall died, every time I went to the smokehouse, I said, I want Gary Marshall's table Friday night at 8 o'clock. So I would always sit in a table that was associated with a very successful person before me. It's all about absorbing the energy of the people that aren't there anymore. That's why when like a famous person's house goes up for sale, it's always way over asking, because somebody's like, I'm going to live in a house that Frank Sinatra used to live in, or I'm going to live here because this person lived here in the 40s. They've been gone for 60 years. It's not like they're going to pop out of the closet and go, you have some trouble with the end of Act 2. That's not how that works. But you're absorbing the energy of the dead, sort of, by being able to say, like, well, I have this regular routine. I do this. This is where I sit. And again, when you come in, you have a feeling of authority. In Slump, that has translated to when I feel terrible and I feel like there's no way that I'm ever going to get things back on track, I go to the same restaurants. I'll go to Musso and Frank. I'll go to the Smokehouse. Those are the restaurants I've been going to for 20 years. I go there. I sit by myself in a booth that I used to sit in all the time. And I say, everything's going to be fine. And you feel like you're at home when you're not in your home. And it helps you feel like the whole world isn't collapsing around you, because you still have these little pillars of normalcy scattered around that you can go stand behind so the roof doesn't cave in on you.
Let me ask you this. When you go to the two quote-unquote dives, and one person's dive is another person's Musso and Frank's, because some people enjoy diner food, whatever. What are those? You don't have to tell me what they are, but where do you sit, and how do you know someone of importance sat in that little booth?
Well, usually I ask about the history of the restaurant, or why somebody's there. There's a place, it's not a dive, it's just not fancy. It's directly across the street from Warner Brothers, and it's called El Carpintero. It is a wonderful little Mexican restaurant. And the guy that runs it, Hector, had always wanted to have his own place, opened that. He's had the same 3 or 4 waiters forever. And they're the only people you ever see. And I got to the point where I was at a new restaurant once. And one of the waiters there had gone to work at this other restaurant. And he's still at El Carpintero. But I walked into the restaurant and I was like kind of getting the lay of the room and whatever. And there's this hand on my back and he goes, Troy, what are you doing here? And it's like instantly I'm family at this new place.
Sure.
Because this waiter remembers me because I went there all the time and I tipped like a pasha. Like it's
that helps.
Make that place important to you and understand how restaurants work. Like if you go to the Palm for lunch, you're not going to sit in a booth because everybody in a booth is going to be the head of this or that, or an SVP somewhere, and all the unwashed get to sit in the tables around the room. Like all the people that aren't as glamorous or exciting are not in booths. They're just scattered around during the open dining area on the tables.
So that illusion, though, is important. It is as vain as it sounds.
On some level, like Chuck Freeze, that was the guy I got that advice from about you're 2 and 2 and just go there for 20 years. He tells a story in there's a documentary about Chasen's, which many years ago was the of the moment place to go. And he walked in and he said, I could see these other tables. He goes, I'd always get seated in this one area, but I knew the first table's up in the front. So it was like, how do I get to those tables? Because then I'll know I've really got a presence if I get to those tables. And he basically eventually ended up sitting at tables in the front that like where Hitchcock used to go for lunch and like all these huge players. And that made him feel good. So much about this business and your longevity is about knowing how to make yourself feel good and value yourself. And people are very quick to say, you got a terrible ego. It's like, no, I have achieved things. It's about your mental health to feel like you have earned a place and you are somebody, if no one else is reminding you that you're somebody. Most of us are fairly unsung. I've done hundreds of hours of television, and I can walk unmolested through the streets of any major city in this country. No one knows who I am. Or if they do, they come up and they go, "You look like Karl Rove. Did anybody ever tell you that?" That's why I don't wear wireless frames anymore. It's like, "You look like Karl Rove." That's great. I'd rather look like somebody, somebody else.
But that being said, that it's important to feel good, especially when you put so much time into a project. But then you said something, maybe it was off camera, about having an outlet outside of the industry and how important that is.
It's a matter of knowing where to go to feel good about yourself. And to have those places, whether it's certain friends, like some of the best days of my life, even now, are had in rooms that are basically a ratty couch and Christmas lights and old posters of the Cocteau Twins. And it's like, why am I here? And it's just like, well, 30 years ago, I used to enjoy being here. And now I can just go and just melt and hang out with a friend and listen to music. And people that are obsessed with fame and start hanging on to famous people, it's the saddest thing in the world, because it's like, those people, most of the time, even if you're genuinely friends with them, they don't know who you are, or there are so many people pumping through your life that you don't, they don't have time to commit to, these friends that they've made in the last few years. They still know people that they went to University of Florida with 40 years ago.
So hanging on to something that's real.
Yes. And it's easy to do, and food is an easy way to do it, which is why I always say restaurants. It's a place where you can become part of a community. It's that whole Cheers thing. You just want to be where everybody knows your name. And even if that's, some guy that's just bringing you your drink, or you can walk into a place and they know what you're going to order, so it just comes to the table. That's the best. I watched a guy many years ago. I was at the Polo Lounge, and I saw another, won't name the name, big A-list celebrity comes in. They seat him. His salad comes out of the kitchen in like 30 seconds, the McCarthy salad. And it's like, he's been coming there for so long, they know what he wants, and they're going to bring it out to him immediately. Or they know he has a reservation at noon, and it's just ready when he comes in. There's got to be a wonderful comfort in that. I'm not quite there yet. I don't have that shorthand anywhere.
But being okay with, if you don't have it, that you have outside interests, and you wrote poems, and you've
have someplace
developed
to go.
Relationships with people that maybe aren't in the industry as a way to keep yourself grounded.
Yeah, and have a personal project once in a while.
Which you do.
And it's that thing where, you have to ask yourself every once in a while, this is an Ali Willis thing, it's like, does it have soul? Like this thing that I'm working on, does it have soul? That woman has so many crazy little personal projects. It was just shocking. You'd be like, oh, and I also did this animated short. It's like, oh, I didn't know you did that. Oh yeah, this new animated short's coming out in 2 weeks, and this is going to happen, and this is happening, and I've got this side project here that she had more control over as a personal project, so that she felt like she could really invest all of herself in something. And I always say, like, for me, the most important thing is that I'm making something that appeals to an audience that people are going to receive very well. There are small things I do that have way tinier audiences. When I did comic books, I published a comic book that, no joke, had 160 copies ordered by the distributor. It cost me more to print the book than I made on the book, because it was such a small run and I paid so much to have the color separations done for it. And I never went back to comic books again. But I have one thing that I can look to and go, this is my comic book. Here's the intro by Weird Al Yankovic, which is the only reason anybody bought it, because it was one more thing that Weird Al had his name on. But that was it. And I was like, I got to do this. And if you made it, it's legitimate. That's the other thing. I've self-published books on Amazon as well as working with publishers. And I'm as proud of the stuff that I did by myself on Amazon without an editor as I am with anything that I had published through anybody, because it was mine and it felt like something I should do. I wrote a book called And Another Thing about the TV notes process, which is far from being, the biggest selling book in the world, because it's about a very niche thing. But it was a thing that was all the knowledge I had about something that meant a lot to me, and I figured somebody would identify with it. And I have a lot of execs and assistants and people like that look to that book for their first experience on how to give and get notes without it being a contentious process, which is part of my general mission. I don't think that making television should be a contentious process. we're all part of making something amazing that will hopefully live for a little while. So why not have a good time doing it?
What's your reaction to the idea that no other element matters in a story if there's no conflict?
I think that is very true. And I think people misunderstand conflict. Conflict doesn't have to be people punching each other in the face on the boardwalk, as I used to say. Conflict is person versus time, person versus their vision of themselves versus the reality of being themselves. Some of the greatest movies I've ever seen, the conflict is so subtle that you can't even identify the villain. It's just a person versus time, So, yeah, I would say that that's an accurate statement.
How do you create conflict?
Create conflict is, as Jen Grisanti, I don't know if you've ever interviewed her before. I love her.
She's amazing.
She's wonderful. But she talks a lot about wounds, the character's wounds, and those identify the things that they are dealing with and coping with even now, about how do I resolve this thing that happened to me so long ago that it's practically in my DNA. And conflict is about what that person cares about putting behind them. And it's like, sure, it's the guy who shot my paw, but it's also, I'm going to lose my house if I can't come up with $2,000 to pay back taxes or like some other thing. There are some things that are more visually interesting than others, but good conflict can be defined in a much broader way than I think most people think about it.
What is meaningful conflict versus conflict that doesn't matter?
For me, meaningful conflict is something that resonates with the character individually. Like a Bond film is a totally different thing. It's like, if I don't go here, these missiles are going to do this and everybody's going to die. That bores me to death because I've seen it. I've seen it and seen it and seen it again. And what matters to him personally is very rarely on screen. Like sometimes, it's, his daughter that he doesn't know is his daughter or whatever the plot of the last Bond film was. But if it's not organic to the person and their history and their life, it doesn't register to me. It's the authenticity of that conflict. We all understand what it is to be emotionally connected to something, but just like some relentless, unmotivated bad guy that has to be stopped is not super interesting. And you very rarely walk out of a theater like crying because of the resolution to a conflict that involves somebody who's that cut and dried.
Well, some of the best villains, though, are ones that don't reveal themselves
Right.
at first.
Well, every Darren Aronofsky film that's ever been made has always got a huge element of personal conflict in there, which is why they work most of the time.
What do people get wrong about conflict?
People get wrong in thinking that conflict has to be noisy and easily registers. It's very easy to put two people in a situation where they argue and then it escalates into this terrible thing. But if there's some kind of a history there, and some kind of a wound that is motivating everything, I think that's much better quality conflict.
What if someone gets a note that says there's not enough conflict?
Well, that's a tough one. It usually comes in the guise of, what are the stakes? All stakes really are is the sense that there is conflict that needs to be resolved. So stakes, it's a very complicated note to get stakes in one word because you have to figure out how to make it personally important to somebody. And that's when you have to go back in and do the interview where someone has to give you a bite like, I entered this thing 3 years ago and I lost. And it's just, I'm not going to lose it this year to this person who's going to do this for the first time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've taken what's at stake for that person individually into account, making that conflict personal. And we all know what it is to feel like to lose to somebody we don't like who doesn't have a history. Everybody I know has one story about some unqualified person that leapfrogged over them and got a job. That's personal and that matters. Just as an example.
Troy, can you illustrate for us through your work ways to build conflict?
I talked about it earlier in the interview with Flipping Out as the great example with Jeff Lewis, who I adore. He is a wonderful person with a great personality. But again, his OCD presented a lot of challenges. And it was important that we set that up, but we can't just have a guy sit down and say, well, you know, I'm very hard to please because I'm very specific about things. So there were lots of little things in the episode. He turns to somebody who's working for him and he says, you're picking up the lunch order? Yes. Okay, 2 things. No onions. And to drink, I want 85% Sprite, 10% fruit punch, 5% this. If they don't have Sprite, I want 80% this, 20% this, and 5% this. And it's like, he's like, who on earth is precise about basically making a suicide, which is what we called them when I was a kid, which is just run up and just put a little Mountain Dew in this and a little fruit punch and a little of this, and you've created something. He's so precise about what he wants that there is no logical reason why his needs can't be fulfilled. The conflict is within him because he can't be happy until things go exactly according to the way he wants them to go. And that helps you identify with him and his conflict. And more than once, you'll look at the TV and go like, why can't you just do what he asked you to do? Like when something goes wrong, even when you would imagine that he's going to be the villain, you're like, all he wants is this thing. You know, why is it so hard for him to have what he wants? Which is a whole other deal. But that's where I think, you know, personal conflict is important. Because, you know, and he doesn't want to be yelling at people. It's just a byproduct of him not being able to have the basically very simple thing that he could have if the world paid attention to instructions or anybody listened to him.
Sure. So you're setting up these little sort of landmines, not
Yes.
the big ones, but just little baby ones going forward.
Yes, and those things all escalate because there's going to be a time where what he wants matters and he's not going to get it, and it's going to be the worst thing that ever happened.
Hence, he'll flip out.
Yeah.
And so is the audience invested in, oh, here's the little one, okay, and then it's going to get bigger.
If you don't have a villain that you can identify with, and this is where the Bond films have been right for a long time, is there's always some motivation that the villain has for being the villain. Like, well, you know, this happened to me and my vision of the world is like this because that would resolve the problem that I see in the world. And you can identify with them because you understand that, like, yes, they're maniacs that want to blow everything up, but they want to blow it up because there's something that happened to them that they can't get through unless they wipe life off of this island or whatever his motivation is. That works because you feel for this villain. Like, here is a wounded person who is trying to get through life like we all are. They're just doing it in a really hazardous and crappy, scary way.
What are the right ways and wrong ways to introduce a main character?
I said earlier that, you know, backstory isn't always story. So if you are slavishly devoted to spelling out everything that's happened to a person up to the point that you meet them for the first time, it's a huge drag. It's like you've saddled them with a weight that is so heavy, like the explanation of themselves, that you can't just invest in whatever moment you're introduced to them in. You know, like if you watch a Bond film and you've never seen a James Bond film before, and the first shot you see is this guy jumping out of a helicopter on a parachute, and they were like, I bet you're wondering how I got here. Well, my name is James, and I went to school here, and this happened, and then one day somebody came up to me and said, do you want to be in a high school program for secret agent wannabes? And I said, sure. And it was okay, but it took a long time, and I wasn't really good with a gun at first, but now I'm amazing, and I have a license to kill. And then the parachute comes back down. You would hate that. So this whole thing about, you know, backstory and knowing everything about somebody before you see them is not a great way to introduce a character. Introducing a character during a moment in which they are vulnerable is immediately engaging. Look at movies like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I'm trying to think of an example that I would give you myself, but I don't have one that immediately comes to mind. I'm 47 shows and several hundred episodes in. I don't remember them all. Sometimes I watch TV and I go, oh, I forgot I worked on that. It's very rare, but it does happen. Thanks for reruns of shows I did 15 years ago that somebody said, we'll never be able to re-air it because there's no aftermarket for reality shows. And that's why you can't have portable pension and health through the Writers Guild, because we don't want to pay for something we can only air one time. Then they run a marathon of it every Saturday for a year and a half. But I'll keep my personal wounds out of this, because that's all backstory.
What is a character's flaw, and why is it important for us to know that in the story?
A character flaw often is something to help you as the viewer identify with a character. That's why we have them. I'm not perfect, so I don't want to watch people who are perfect. When you watch movies like Clueless, or you watch movies like Mean Girls, you get to see what's wrong with every character. And the other thing the character flaw does is it allows you to project onto them imperfect people that you already know in your life. And you go, oh, that's like so-and-so. That's like the person who used to talk about me all the time in high school, and I always wished something would happen to them. You know, somebody would confiscate their burn book. It's real. Character flaws make characters identifiable to the layman who are watching the film.
What if somebody's too flawed in a movie?
If they're too flawed in the movie to a point where I can't root for them, that is a problem. And I'm trying to think of a good example. If you watch a movie where somebody is so relentlessly crap at everything they do, you're not excited for them. You don't root for them anymore. Like Clouseau. The thing in the Pink Panther films that works with him is he is a bumbling idiot, but he has regard for himself, and he wants to be seen as very successful, that we can all identify with, and that overtakes the flaw. So you realize that this is a person who can fail. If you don't think someone can fail, you can't identify with them, and there are no stakes in place for them during that film. As a person who is nothing but a string of successes, what a snooze. Like, you know, even in a Bond film, every once in a while, somebody gets away on their little glider or whatever, and you're like, well, he's going to get him the next time. He's not going to get him this time. He's escaped, so now we've got 3 more movies to watch to see if he ever gets to that guy.
What's your favorite flawed character?
Oh, man. There are so many. I think Peter Sellers as Clouseau is pretty good. Chance the Gardener, who in Being There, who also is played by Peter Sellers, is a flawed character who is just not particularly mentally with it. And he keeps stumbling through these situations that he somehow not only survives, but turns to his own benefit without really trying. It's a lot of outside forces on the character, which is also something I don't normally like. But he's so likable as someone who is just trying to get through and be emotionally sensitive and involved with the people around him, that kind of wipes away everything, I think. You just identify him because you know what it's like to be in a situation where you can't control what's happening. So you can still identify with him even though he's not mentally very with it.
Why is it important for the main character to have transformation?
Because if nothing changes, what did you just watch? How can you not be affected by an hour and a half or 2 hours worth of things happening to you? Transformation is important because we also, we ourselves, hopefully, as life progresses, I am not the same person I was at 10. Thank God. What a nervous little runt I was, wanting to be somebody notable. No 12-year-old should be talking to his friends about his legacy. Like, what am I leaving behind? What will people remember me for? And who cares? I did, but that was a pretty big flaw. Like, I'm not a big fan of younger me. The younger me was afraid of everything because everything I did was an opportunity for me to humiliate myself in front of my peers. I wanted to be a cartoonist or a comic book artist, which nobody I knew wanted to be or wanted to do. And because it was a different interest, I couldn't find common ground with them on it. So I was just the weirdo who was always drawing in class, who in middle school was having his drawings stuck on the wall in the back of the classroom by my homeroom teacher, like I was 5. It was just a very strange place to be.
What are the biggest mistakes you see writers make with their main characters?
They don't think about them, or they are trying to write to an archetype. That they're not creating a fully rounded character. They're creating a hero that could be interchangeable with any other hero from any other film.
What are some of these archetypes?
Well, the superhero, the secret agent, the ones that seem to be basically the same in every movie. These infallible folks, or somebody who's completely based on another character. And that happens a lot. Like, I remember when Tarantino movies first became a big thing, I read a lot of screenplays that my friends had worked on that were just these very long, talky things. And just the most important thing was that somebody said, every 5 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 2 minutes, or 30 seconds. And they were just trying to emulate what they had seen other writers write. The main characters weren't individual. They weren't personal to the writer. They weren't identifiable as actual people. They're toys that are being made to follow a routine for this purpose of writing a screenplay that feels like something else that someone else had seen.
Do you think that was just a trend, the way, people try to emulate found footage horror films?
People do it all the time. I mean, anything that's successful becomes the thing that you try to emulate. And I remember when I was younger, I was trying to write Woody Allen movies. And every character I had was some poor, schlubby little underdog that was with somebody who was way too pretty for them and was always worried that his world was going to collapse at any minute because the pretty girl was going to figure out that he was nobody. That was a lot of my own insecurity, because Woody Allen films were very close to me when I was younger, because I just was so into, at a very young age, it was like, this is what life is really like for most people. This is a guy who's successful on a certain level, but he never thinks that he's ever won. He's not necessarily an underdog all the time, but he is also not a particularly confident lead. And I liked that because I didn't feel like I was hot stuff when I started writing.
Do you think that he was the voice for what most people think, but they just didn't want to give the appearance that they didn't have it figured out, and that they
Yeah. And there's that great moment in Annie Hall where he's standing in line for a movie and some bloviating jerk is talking about the film. And he says, oh, well, I don't think you're right on. And he says, oh, well, let's ask Marshall McLuhan. And he pulls in one of the greatest media scholars in the history of time to debate this guy in the lobby of a movie theater about, was it Triumph of the Will? Was the movie that he had dragged her to go see?
Forgotten, sorry, it's been a long
Taking
time.
him to see some Leni Riefenstahl film, and this guy was talking about just pulling stuff out of nowhere, trying to make himself sound educated, and he just pulled this guy over. He's like, well, let's ask Marshall McLuhan about that. I don't think half of the people that watched the movie knew who Marshall McLuhan was. But it's fun. It's a little Easter egg for intellectuals to be like, oh, cool.
How important is it for the antagonist to be unsympathetic?
I don't think an antagonist should be unsympathetic. And that may not be the way to go, but that's what I'm going to tell you. Is when I talked earlier about how an antagonist should be somebody that you should identify with on some level. The humanity of any character in a film matters, because if you can't get into that headspace and understand what's motivating them, it's just another cartoon. It's just, when you reduce characters to these sort of one-dimensional, like, I'm possessed by being a jerk. And that's all I think about is how to be a jerk all day, mustache twirl. That's no fun to watch. That's for cartoons.
Would you say the more people dislike an antagonist, the more they get involved in the story?
Yes, but only if you've taken time to set up a protagonist that you care about. I know it's a very short response, but that's all I have for you.
Is there a protagonist you can think of that we tend to care for, like where we have mixed feelings on?
If I reference Max Dugan Returns and nobody has any idea what the heck that is, that's on you. But it's one of those things where you have a protagonist / antagonist in Jason Robards who's trying to make good with his daughter that he's been absent from for so many years by showing up with a bunch of stolen money to fix her life. He is ruining her life at the same time that you're hoping he gets away from whoever's after him. So Ta-da! Three-dimensional protagonist/antagonist blend.
Well, that almost reminds me of Catch Me If You Can, the Frank Abagnale.
Yeah. My dad used to be fascinated by him back in the day.
It's a fascinating story. And of course, it makes it's hard to dislike Leonardo DiCaprio in that role.
Sure, you are correct.
Very hard.
He's hard to dislike at all.
Right, correct. But there are moments where he's definitely just, you just like, why am I invested in this man's story?
Right. Well, and the thing is, not only do you like Leonardo DiCaprio, but they've made the antagonist, Tom Hanks, so likable and so driven and so noble in his purpose that you don't hate him. You just, you're kind of almost half hoping that he does catch him so that he'll be sort of out of his misery.
What if the antagonist is more sympathetic than the protagonist?
That would probably never happen. Or at least I have never seen an example of that. An antagonist being more likable than the protagonist. There are anti-heroes, sure. But I think they're doing themselves in. I don't think it's a lot of the outside forces being the issue.
You mentioned Tom Hanks as the villain. He was also the villain in Elvis, you could say.
Sure.
Did you see Elvis?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. Did you like it?
I liked it very much.
I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
I thought it was incredible. I've always been a fan of Baz Luhrmann.
Again, hard to dislike. But, the Tom Hanks, in a sense, you did know a bit of his backstory. I believe it wasn't until later in the film, correct? Or no?
Right. And then you start to find out that he's had this nefarious past.
Right, and that he was kind of like pushed out of, because the Nazis came in and these different things happened. And then you start to you soften more toward him.
You do. I mean, and he is as tragic as a villain has ever been in a film. But I also think when you're talking about Elvis, you're talking about figures that are so well known to the public that there's already a built-in investment in whatever that story might be. And I've heard, the stories about Tom Parker. Jerry Weintraub was involved for a while when he was booking the tours for Elvis. Are you aware of that?
Did not know that, no.
Jerry Weintraub, when he was younger, was booking concerts, flew out to Vegas and paid somebody, was it Parker? Something like $1 million to be in the business of book. And he'd been trying to get him on the phone for years. And he said, all right, he says, you show up in Vegas with $1 million and we'll talk about you booking the tours or booking the tour for Elvis. And he ended up working with Tom Parker towards the end of Elvis's life. Steve Binder, who produced the Elvis 68 comeback special, is a really great person to talk to about that because he's had firsthand experience with Elvis producing that special and was there at the point in the film where the schism between Elvis and Tom Parker was most obviously looming, according to that story.
How has selling a reality show evolved in the last 20 years?
I think it's much the same as it ever was. A good idea is a good idea, but I also think that we're also way more reliant on importing existing concepts from other countries. You look at things like The Masked Singer, where an executive was literally in a restaurant having dinner and watching that show on television and went, oh, we should make that. That's different. We're more exposed to formats from other places than we've ever been because people are looking for them. They're trying to find something that's already proven that they don't have to lose money on while they develop it. So that may be a little bit different. You see the rise of guys like Avi Armoza, who is one of my favorite people in the world. He's just a really cool guy who packages formats in Israel. That's actually where you make most of your money because if you're producing television shows in Israel, it's a very middle-class pursuit. It's not something that you really make a fortune doing. But you have certain examples. There's a show called Couch Diaries that comes from there, which is a great idea. You get a passport, you take somebody to the airport, you don't tell them where they're going, they find out when they get to the airport, and they're going to a place that's going to help them overcome some issue they have in their life. Like there was a kid that was terrified of women, and they sent him to a room with these 3 women around the same age as him. They took him out, showed him a good time, he had a great time, and just suddenly became more comfortable around them. They took a woman who was very sort of mild-mannered and very religious and very proper, sent her someplace to live with a family that didn't observe the same religion that she did. They got used to each other and had that experience. That show has been sold in something like 15 or 20 territories the world over. And the creator, Zippy Rosenblum, which is the greatest name you've ever heard in your life, isn't it? Zippy Rosenblum is now an executive, I think, with Hachette. So, the idea that formats can be repackaged and resold all over the world is kind of a neat thing, I think. It's a great way for creators in other places to get seen in the United States, which is no longer seen as the end-all, be-all. Like if it's not on American television, it doesn't exist, which is kind of how people used to think. I guess I'll stop there.
Do you have to be working inside reality television to sell a show?
It's not unhelpful. I was in it for about 8 years before I knew enough people that I felt like I could call somebody up and go. And that was even with an agency. I had a really decent agent, and I didn't want to expose myself before I was ready and really knew the full deal on how you should be pitching. So I waited until I was ready. And it's much better to try to pitch after you have connections and you have titles. I got my agent after I was working on the Osbournes. So I would start calling people and go, "Hi, it's Troy DeVolld from over at the Osbournes." And they go, "Ooh, I don't know who you are, but I know the name of that show." It was very easy to get meetings.
So a person sort of fresh here in LA with no connections, not working in the industry, but they have this amazing idea. Is that possible? They can actually...
It is not unheard of, but it is really hard. If you have talent attached, if your brother-in-law is a quarterback for a football team and you think that he would be great as a subject of a show and he has said yes, go for it. But it's very rarely done that somebody completely fresh to things gets something sold. You've got to bring something with you. You've got to figure out where your value is as a producer. If you've never done it before, there isn't anything that you bring to the actual production. So give yourself enough time to get acquainted with some people and make yourself bigger by associating with people that can pitch with you. I always pitch through an existing production company that has an existing relationship with whatever network I think is right for the show. And that's just easier for everybody because the credibility line is established.
Who are the players involved in a show being sold?
Well, you've got the production company, which you've got the people who do development at those production companies, the people who have existing relationships with the network. It's network executives obviously have something to say, whoever's in development, whoever's in programming and current series. Those are the people that you want to get interested in the work.
How is selling a reality show different from selling a screenplay or a movie?
A screenplay or a movie is more of a solitary thing coming out of the gate. A movie is going to go through several iterations and you're probably going to be fired off the film and they'll bring on another writer who's established to complete that. If you have not read Tom Lennon and Ben Garant's book that's called Making Movies for Fun and Profit, and Fun and Profit is crossed out, so it's Making Movies for Profit. They detail that pretty well about how if you're the writer that starts, you'll get it sold. If it's a reality show, everything is super collaborative, but a reality show probably has more fingers in the fudge than almost anything because everybody thinks they can contribute to a reality program.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's perceived as something that's easier to do, erroneously. But it's also, I think people have more of an idea of how a reality show gets made than they do of how a film gets made. They assume that it's just kind of this massive Beetle Bailey cloud of flying fists and action that somehow settles into a finished product.
I think you've said never blindly email anyone anything in the entertainment industry.
Right. I would say that because email is so immediate. It's like teleporting into somebody's living room in your underpants and wanting to have a conversation with them. If you go through a channel or you meet them through someone that you know, then it makes sense. If you're blindly emailing, people all day get unsolicited contact. And it also is a very amateurish way to move forward. If you're going to email somebody, do it in a way where it's like, indicate that you know something about them and be asking them for advice as opposed to asking them for action on your behalf. Because when you write to someone and you say, I like a lot of the things that you do, I'm a little confused about the process I'm trying to get started, I have this thing that I'm trying to move forward with, don't attach any documents that they would have to read and expose themselves to the liability if somebody else is making a show similar to yours, so that you and a lawyer stand up at some point and go, we should sue them because that's just like the thing we pitched that they never wanted to look at, but I emailed to them.
And on social media as well. So some certain
on social
platforms are wonderful, but people can be very hypervigilant.
Yeah, for heaven's sakes, don't talk about the thing you're trying to sell on social media.
Not only that, I'm sorry, I meant in terms of trying to contact people blindly, again, with an ask for them rather than something more.
Could you read this for me?
Sure.
Nobody wants to read. I still think every day about that thing that Josh Olson wrote years ago, that I don't want to read your fucking script. It's a great read. It's like, I have a pile of stuff next to my bed from my friends that I need to read. I have things I have to write. I have things I have to do. I cannot stop and take the amount of time that it takes to read a screenplay to give somebody that I don't know advice.
So that being said, because that's disheartening to hear, I realize that is, most people, they're inundated with
Sure. The
cold
realities
pitches.
of this business are very hard to hear.
That's true. Okay, but how do we overcome that in the sense of okay, if it's an unknown, and they have several screenplays they'd like to have made, what are the proper channels?
The proper channels are to look for representation. It's very hard to get anybody to read anything if it's not coming to them through an agent. The old phrase, over the transom, nobody reads things that just pop in through the window. It's not a subpoena. You don't tap somebody on the shoulder and they have to read it.
Okay, so find representation. What if they can't find that?
You can use an entertainment attorney that has decent relationships with people to submit things. It's a little more rare, and it's not going to be free. They're going to take a percentage of whatever you make off of that sale, just like an agent would, or ask you for an upfront fee. You just have to be prepared for that.